always recommend then to go for the highest carb intake you can digest. You can cook your rice and then you can add, for example, some dry fruits to it when you start racing. So imagine if you eat carbs, then you get a spike in your insulin production.
Maaike, nutrition is one of the hot topics in the modern peloton right now. A grand tour like the Tour de France is a massive assault on your body. Fail to fuel or eat properly and you will pay the price. Just what are the pros doing these days to make sure they're fuel up enough to last for 3 weeks of grueling racing? Joining us today live from the Tour de France is Maaike Polspoel. I hope that was almost correct. Performance nutritionist working with one of cycling's biggest teams, Soudal Quick-Step, to discover what the pros are eating and drinking during a grand tour. Also, she's a keen athlete herself, so she's incredibly well placed to enlighten us on the modern day eating habits of a pro cyclist. Maaike, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we are very excited to have you here. And also thanks for taking the time on the second rest day during the biggest cycling event on the calendar, the Tour de France. Let's start the interview with a quick fire round of questions. You are only allowed to answer yes or no.
Okay.
If absolutely necessary, a one-sentence answer.
Okay, I will do my best.
Is it difficult for a rider to keep his race weight doing a grand tour?
No.
Are the pros eating special super nutrition products that are not easy to find for amateur cyclists?
No.
And this is then the last one. What is the strangest or weirdest myth around cycling nutrition?
Whew, this is a hard one actually.
You can think of it and we can come back to it later.
It would be nice.
Yeah. Okay, let's dive into the interview then. Let's talk through meal times from the start of the day to the end. So when the riders get up till they go to bed in the evening, where does it begin? Obviously breakfast. How important is that meal to start things off?
Yeah. So it differs a little bit between days. So like for today, the riders have a carb loading day. So tomorrow they will be loaded quite well already. But during the night, you will also burn a little bit carbs. Glycogen, which is in your muscles, will go down. And you want that to be as high as possible before the start of the race. So the breakfast will help to increase the glycogen again after your night. So when they do a stage race, every stage, they are depleted with sugar, with glycogen, with the sugar that is built up in the muscle. And so it will be harder and harder to make sure that the glycogen is full, the stores are full again. So we start with the breakfast, which is normally between, they have a carb intake between 2 and 4 grams per kilogram body weight. And it can be different things. So in the Grand Tour, we try to put a lot of variation into the breakfast. So we have specials of the day to make sure that the riders are happy to eat and happy to have a breakfast. So it's not only bread or pasta or oats. So we try to variate a little bit. And but they can choose whatever they want. So breakfast is a little bit of a buffet, and they can choose whatever they want within the limit that they need.
Now you also mentioned oats, like the porridge, but shouldn't the riders also steer a little bit around too high fiber intake?
Yeah, so we have different days in the Grand Tour. So when we were working up a hard stage or a hard block of stages, then we try to avoid as much as fiber as possible. So we call it the low fiber days. But on the normal days, they are allowed to eat some oats because it's also good for their bowel transit and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's not that they are eating no fibers for 21 days, but because then they might have a risk to get constipated, and that's not what you want, of course.
No, it's definitely not.
Yeah.
What is the all-time favorite for breakfast between the riders on the team?
Pancakes. In our team, it's pancakes. So you can make them really happy with a good pancake with some jam on it, or some. We do not have Dutch people here, but with stroop or something like that. And yeah, it's for all ages. Pancakes are a really important one, I guess.
Yeah, So you then also then serve them then with syrup and honey,
yeah,
or
some
what?
with stuff like that. With jam, all sugary, so all carbs, because those are really important to be fully loaded before the stage.
So now we touched on glycogen and carbohydrates. What about proteins then in the morning?
Yeah, so we also add a little bit of protein. So for our team, it's important that we have protein intake spread throughout the day. But just the minimum amount they need to recover well, to make sure that there will not be muscle breakdown, because the protein is important for the muscles and the recovery. But they do include a little bit of protein. But normally with everything they eat, because they can eat big amounts of food, then the portion is so big that the amount of protein is also normally high enough.
Right. Now we're at breakfast. It was always my understanding that you would have your last meal about 3 hours before the race start. Is that still logic? I mean, in a Tour de France, you would usually have to start around 1 o'clock. And what about if the rider gets up at 8 or have the breakfast at 9? Is there a second meal on the bus?
Not really a second meal, but they get a pre-race meal from us. So most of the riders try to stay in the same rhythm every day. So also if the start is a little late, they get up at the same time. Just to stick to the rhythm, which is beneficial in the long term. And then they start with the breakfast, and sometimes there is 4 hours in between. Sometimes it's 2.5 hour also can happen, but that's more on the easy stages. And then we always make sure that on the bus there's a pre-race meal that they can eat before. And it's around, between 1.5 hour to 1 hour before the start that they get that one.
Okay. And then I assume also both at breakfast, but also on the bus, that having a really good cup of coffee, an espresso or something, a flat white, is also on the rider's favorite list or not?
Yeah, so it's not something that as a nutritionist I would recommend, because we like to make everything measurable, and you never know in a cup of coffee how much caffeine there will be in, because it depends on the beans and how much time it takes for the water to sink through. But it's definitely something that riders really like, and it's kind of a hype, I guess, in cycling now, that they are really I would not say coffee addicted, but they like also the working with the machine and stuff like that. So it's part of their ritual, I guess.
Yeah, it is. So how come you don't want them to have maybe too much caffeine before the start, or you want to track it, monitor it?
How much caffeine we give to a rider depends a little bit on the rider and how he is digesting the caffeine, because you have slow and fast digesters of caffeine. And we want to make sure that the amount of caffeine they get is just ideal for them. So if we give them the energy gels with caffeine or the caffeine supplements, then we know exactly how much caffeine they get, and we can optimize their scheme, I would say.
Okay.
If they have the coffee before, then we need to then we can average, say this is so much caffeine, this is so much caffeine, but we can never put the exact number on it. And in a sport where everything is on the details, we like to avoid stuff like that.
It's all about those also keeping things monitored and
Yeah. Of course, they can drink a cup of coffee. Yeah? It's not that I'm like, no, you can't, because otherwise we cannot know how much caffeine you have. But for us, it's important that we know what they are doing, and then we can keep that in mind when we are making the plans.
Correct. Yeah. So now let's go to the start line. We're at the start of the stage, and the riders to switch into race mode. Is it important to get a gel or two the last 10-15 minutes before the start? I assume it also depends on the stage profile and the goal for the riders for that stage.
Yeah, so because we have a pre-race meal between 1.5 hours and 1 hour before the race, we do not recommend the riders to have an extra gel 10 minutes before the start. Also because that can cause actually how can you say it? Something like hypoglycemia, which is sometimes seen in people who are not eating enough carbs, or they're feeling weak, because when you start racing, so imagine if you eat carbs, then you get a spike in your insulin production. But also if you're going to race or if you're going to do a physical activity, then you also get a spike in your insulin production, causing that there's a lot of uptake of the sugar. And then this can give you like a hypoglycemia, which make you feel weak actually. And we try to avoid that by giving a pre-race meal 1.5 hour to 1 hour before the race. And then as soon as they started racing, then they can eat something, but not before.
That makes sense. So really some real food intake instead of a bottle of 100 grams of carbohydrate or a gel before. Also
in a Grand Tour like this, the riders are spending a lot of time on the bike, and they need to eat a lot also on the bike. And real food is something that's really important here. Yeah. Also for their health, for their immune system, it's really important to have whole foods and not replacing everything by gels and bars, because then it would not be very healthy for your gastrointestinal tract.
That's right. Yeah, I can also imagine also when they get to the last week of a Grand Tour, they're just sick and tired of eating gels and bars
So we, with our sponsor, we have 6D as a nutrition sponsor. So they have a lot of different flavors and a lot of different nutrition stuff. So they have bars, gels, but also gingerbread, something like gingerbread. They have fruit gums in all different flavors. And this is actually is very beneficial for us, because then the rider gets bored less quick, because there's a lot of variation and they can play around with it.
Different flavors and
flavors, and also nougats, fruit gums, bars, gingerbread, something like that. So there's a lot of variation, which makes it easier to keep eating during a Grand Tour. Because when you stop eating, then it's over, actually.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that a little later. But first, I just want to finish off talking about the carbohydrates. How many grams of carbohydrate would you ask the riders to ingest per hour, like 80 to 100 grams? I mean, today we hear people talking about 120, even more grams per hour.
Yeah, so for us, it depends a little bit on how hard the stages are. The easier stages, the need is less than they have on the very hard stages. So we adapt our carb strategies or carb intake strategies on the heaviness or the stress level of the races, I would say. So, for example, if it's a flat race, there's a breakaway of 2 people, and in the bunch it's going really slow, then a carb intake of 90 grams an hour would be sufficient. But if you have a mountain stage and it's going up and down all day and it's very intense, then we would recommend to the rider to have a carb intake as high as possible. And for some riders, it's not possible, or their maximum carb intake is like 100 grams. But for some, it's 120 or even higher. And we always recommend them to go for the highest carb intake you can digest without having gastrointestinal problems. Because if you're a tourist and you're going to try 120 grams, it can give problems in the beginning. So you really need to train for that also.
You need to train your gut.
Yeah.
You mentioned an amateur cyclist. How should they train the gut to, let's say, a person who goes out and do some sportive or grand fondos on the weekends?
Yeah.
How should they, just like the professionals, they've done it over years to train their gut, how should an amateur cyclist go by this? Starting like a couple of weeks with 40 grams, then after maybe moving up to 60, 80, or how should they go with this?
So it is really important that you know what you want, what your final aim will be. So your final aim will be the highest possible, and you can put a number on that. And then also which race or which Gran Fondo will be very important for you. So for example, you have a Gran Fondo in 10 weeks, then you know if I now start training the gut and I have 10 weeks to build up to my carb intake to that Gran Fondo. And then it's important to know what your maximum level already is. So I would suggest going out on a training, try a carb intake of maybe 60, 70, 80 and see, can I digest this? Yes or no. If you can digest it, then you can go higher until you have like a limit. Okay, now I'm having some stomach issues. Yeah. So this is my maximum. And then when you have that base level, you can build up by a certain amount of carbohydrate intake every week, get it higher and higher, train it 2 times a week, and then also go higher than you are actually planning your intake. So for example, if you're having an intake of 90 the week before, try to have an intake of 100 grams per hour. And then for the race, all should be set and you should be able to digest 90 grams per hour.
That's a good rule of thumb. Yeah. Because I think there's some people now, especially that we talk about nutrition, it's the hot topic at the moment, and everyone knows when you see it everywhere on the internet, the 120 grams. And I can just imagine an amateur cyclist going on and trying it themselves on day one, and they will start bloating and feeling bad, maybe have big stomach issues. So
it's really hard to digest 120 gram, and for sure there are a lot of riders also here in the Tour peloton that are not able to digest 100 grams per hour, and that's okay as long as they can reach their maximum. And if that's 100, then that's also okay.
Would you then prepare the bottles divided by, let's say, 60, 80 and 120 grams?
So depending on which stage we have, so if we have a normal stage or a high carb stage, we call the high intensity stages, we call high carb stages. There we have different bottles. So we have bottles that contain a higher amount of carbohydrates, just to make sure that it's easier for the riders to get the 120 gram or higher, because otherwise they need to eat a lot. So we do adjust the intake, the carbohydrate amount of the bottles.
So inside the team car and also the soigneurs on the course will then have different bottles. But can the riders then go down to the car and then ask specifically, we want the 80 grams, we want the 120, because maybe that person needs to bring a bottle to one rider who is struggling having big loads of carbohydrates at the same time? Yeah,
for sure. And also they can play, so it's not that they will get 120 grams out of one bottle. So we play with the gels and the bars they have. So we have a certain amount of carbs in the bottle, and to reach the 120 grams, they need to eat gels and bars extra. So the guys who have a lower intake or can digest a lower amount, just take, for example, a gel less. And then it all will average a little bit out, and they will all have the intake they need.
That's interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Because we all know, I think a lot of our listeners here on the Castelli podcast, they're just like myself. They either raced a few years professionals, or a lot of them also are racing today as amateurs. And we all know when you go into race mode, I mean, sometimes you even forget to drink, to hydrate yourself. And then on top, you have to think about getting in all these carbohydrates per hour. Do you know, are any of the riders reminded about the fuel intake during a stage, like on the Garmin with notifications popping up, or how is that unfolding?
Yeah. So we have the Eat My Ride app we use, which is an application that you can download actually on your Garmin. And you can make nutrition plans in it, or you can make a prediction of, okay, now I'm going to ride for 3 hours. I need 90 grams per hour. And it makes a nutrition plan for you. You can add all the products you're going to eat, you're going to drink. And then it gives a pop-up when you're riding, like, okay, now you need to eat a bar. Now you now you need to drink, stuff like that. And some of our riders are using that tool just to get a reminder. For sure, if you're on the head of the bunch and then you see a pop-up, okay, now you need to eat a bar. Then they click on the Garmin and they get their bar. So there are some tools that are actually reminding them. And of course, our sports directors also still need to remind them, because although nutrition is really important, in the heat of the moment, sometimes they forget this. Still, even with everything we know, and we know that nutrition is important, but still sometimes they forget it. And so everything that is reminding them is always good.
It's always good, yeah. No, because like the heat of the moment, or you're in the breakaway, or just in the pack, it's easy to forget about those little things, but those little things that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
If you bonk in the end of the stage, we have seen this. We saw it also last year with some of the big GC riders losing, like Pogacar, losing a lot of time on one single stage.
Yeah.
So now we get to the feed zone. So my question to you, which something I think all the cycling fans out there keep asking themselves, what's in the food bags that the soigneurs or the musette that the soigneurs are distributing in the feed zones?
Yeah, so for sure there are bidons in there. So we have 2 different kind of bidons depending on which stage we have. We have high carb bidons, we have normal bidons, we have water also in it. We have some Coke inside, so we still give some Coca-Cola, which is for sure on the hot days sometimes very welcome for the riders. And next to that we have some general nutrition. We have our special rice cakes. So we have Rice Krispies rice cakes that we put in the feeding bags, which is actually on top of our product range we have from 6D. And next to the Rice Krispies, we have also some bars and some gels, depending on where the feed zone is. If it's early in the stage, then we will have more bars in it. If it's later in the stage, we have more gels in it. But we do recommend the riders to take as much as possible with them in their cycling jersey.
Yeah.
If you miss your feeding bag and you have no teammates around you that have taken a feeding bag, then you need to be able to rely on your own provision you took with you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of variation in there, and nothing special, I guess, just the basics for us, and that's sufficient.
It's interesting you mentioned that little can of Coke, because you don't see them, at least on television, that often anymore, that small can of Coke or Fanta. But it's good to hear that it's still part of the musette, because I remember that up through the 90s and 2000s, and you would always see the riders popping open a small can there during the race. Yeah. That's good. Also getting something a little different.
Yeah, and it's for sure they're not using it every stage. And also if you're doing the final and there's a last climb, then you're probably also not going to use it. But if you're more in the back of the bunch, then a small can of Coke is sometimes a nice refreshment.
Yeah.
Because you're eating a lot of sugar stuff, and this is a little bit sparkling, so it's a little bit different. And the experience learns that riders are really happy with that.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
So now you mentioned also a touch on rice cakes.
Yeah.
So you have those that are being supplied by the sponsor of the team. I love the rice cakes, by the way. And I know they come in so many variations. Are you also making your own rice cakes for the riders?
Yeah, and we also know, like I said before, as a nutritionist, numbers are important and we want to know what exactly is in it. So we also do the calculations of the rice cakes, and it's our soigneurs, so our assistants that are helping actually with making them. And every year there can be different. So every year we try new stuff, and now we have rice cakes that are very popular, which is based on Rice Krispies, for example. So they're kind of crispy. And they really like it. So we try also to improve these and to make special rice cakes so that the riders are always surprised. But still, that I know exactly what's in it, so that I know when I'm going to make nutrition plans what they should eat, how many carbs they got.
They intake, yeah. What is the favorite flavor between the riders?
Oh, that's a hard one. Apple is something I heard a lot. Also agrum. I'm not sure if this is an English word.
If you have to describe it, what would it be?
Yeah, it's like not an orange, but like a little bit bigger, and then there's it's pink inside.
That is a hit.
Yeah, for sure.
And refreshing in summer, can you imagine?
Yeah, and
like
we have of course chocolate bars with chocolate flavor, because the riders, of course, they can eat chocolate, but they will not eat a lot of chocolate, and then if they can have chocolate bars in the race and the taste of chocolate, and they're getting very happy of that. We all are getting happy of that flavor, of course. So that's also a very popular one.
Nice. So this next question here is a little bit for myself. I'm pretty sure also from a lot of our listeners, they would like to know if you can do like a super high level. Can you describe to our listeners a quick course on how they and myself at home, we can make our own rice cakes and how to wrap them so we can use them on the bike ride?
Yeah. So I think the easiest thing is to have a rice cooker. I'm not sure if you have it, and you can put on the rice in there, for example, and you can let it cook with some. We do a little bit of coconut oil inside, so it's not getting sticky. So if you do it if you put on a little bit of coconut oil inside, then it keeps then it's not burning. So then your rice you can cook your rice, and then you can add, for example, some dry fruits to it, or some other flavors. So sometimes we have dried apricots that we put in small pieces and we put on there. We also add a little bit of fructose to make sure that we have the right amount, the right ratio of glucose fructose, which is also important. And then you just need to make sure that it gets cooked. You put a little bit of gelatin inside, so 1 or 2 leaves of gelatin, and then I guess the moment is there to that you have like kind of an oven scale, where you can throw everything in, make sure it's all flat, and then you put it in the fridge. Then it hardens up, and you have like a very big bar, I would say, and then you need to cut it into pieces, and then the best is, I think, to wrap it in some kind of aluminium foil. We have aluminium foil, which also has a paper side, because then it's a little bit more flexible.
Yeah, less sticky maybe.
Yeah. So if you can find that should be ideal to wrap them and to take them with you.
Oh, I'll try that as soon as I get home.
Yeah, you definitely should.
So I know that the professional teams, they have professional chefs.
Yeah.
Making delicious meals for the riders, even though they still have to shovel in a lot of pasta and rice every day. But I assume that it also source the food locally to make sure it always get high quality products of the riders. and all the micronutrients and everything they need to recover properly. Could it be a challenge sometimes to find good quality products when you travel all over Italy for the Tour of Italy, or in France for the Tour de France and so on? Like for 3 weeks long stage race?
Yeah, so what we have with our chefs is that they try to buy local. In the smaller shops, of course, they go to the supermarkets when they need some big qualities. But for the more specific things, they really try to go to the local shops and to buy all local products. And up until now, it was always kind of okay to find these products. We also sometimes ask for the products from hotels, and the quality there sometimes is less. But our chefs are professionally, so if they think like, okay, this is not a good quality piece of meat or fish, then they just are not going to use it. So we also have like some stuff with us from home. So in case that we cannot find high quality products, then we can use our own. Yeah, taste is everything. So it's really important. The chef is actually a key player also in the team.
It's a very key player, key player, because also going out and maybe have to go and search for the right fish, meat, chicken, whatever,
mushrooms.
vegetable, mushrooms, yeah, exactly, at the local market or in the supermarket So then also the team is also driving around with a food truck for all this, with the kitchen, everything in.
Yeah, so we have two trucks here. So we have our kitchen truck with a built-in kitchen that they will use to prepare everything, and then we also have like a cooler, which has a freezing part and a cooling part. So when we find a good local store with a lot of fresh products that really have a high quality, then we might decide to buy a little bit more, and we can keep it cool in our cooler for example, for the next day. So then you have fresh food, and you know that you have high quality food for in case that you're not finding a local shop with high quality products.
Yeah, because you could also get out to some very remote places, especially in the mountains when the tour will hit the Pyrenees or the Alps twice this year. So it's always good to know what you have in the fridge or in the...
Yeah, and it's really important to have a fridge like that, because now the temperatures are between 30 and 35 degrees. So it's really important to keep the food fresh and to keep it cool, because you also do not want to have hygienic problems that cause riders to get a little bit ill. So everything needs to be stored at the right temperature. And the right hygiene rules need to be followed.
Yeah. How does the evening menu change over a 3-week long race, or does it change?
Yeah, that's sometimes a difficult one, because there are riders who would love to eat just pasta, some tomato sauce, and some chicken like 3 weeks long, but not everyone is getting happy from that. So we try to find like a middle way where everyone is happy. So we have some basics that are always there at their dinner. And then we also have a menu that is a little bit more variation. So it can be pasta, but also rice, couscous, gnocchi, for example. So all high in carbs. So all perfect to load. And then we also we try to have a lot of variation into vegetables, how we present stuff, a lot of variation into the food, depending, and in the meat, in the fish, depending on the stages. We switch to easy digestible or foods that are a little bit harder to digest for the easy stages, for example, but with the right mix of variation for the riders who do not want to eat everyday pasta with tomato sauce and chicken.
What about at the end of the meal? Are desserts allowed for the riders?
Yeah, for sure. They really burn a lot of kilocalories on one stage. So for example, on the mountain stage, they can burn, depending on their weight, between the 6,000 and 8,000 kilocalories. It is really hard to eat 8,000 kilocalories over a day, even if you have a really high intake on the bike.
Yeah.
So desserts are really important also to get their carbs in, but also to get amount of energy in. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
What about on rest days? The evening leading up to a rest day. I mean, are burgers or steaks or a small glass of wine or beer for like the older generation of riders? Are any of those things allowed?
So we call it the cheat meals. So the evening before the rest day, the riders do get a cheat meal where they get, for example, now before the first rest day, they get hamburgers with a lot of different toppings they can choose of, with some potato wedges. they get. So it's really it's a really nice meal, I would say. And then they also get a really nice dessert. So the desserts in generally are really nice, but on the rest days it's a little bit more special and a little bit more normal maybe. So they get a healthy tiramisu or a chocolate mousse or something like that.
Nice.
They get really happy about that. And we also try to listen to the riders, what their favorite meals are. And if it's possible, we try to incorporate those before the rest day, so they have a little moment of joy.
Yeah.
Because they need to enjoy eating. And if we can help them with presenting their favorite dish, that's really nice.
Because that can, like what you're saying, they enjoy eating, because it has to be a pleasure. Just in our daily lives, it has to be a pleasure what we're eating, and the flavors have to be spot on, and it has to be good quality. If you need to eat all that carbohydrate, that you need all that food that you need for the next day, because you're basically preparing for the coming days every time you put something into your mouth, not only that moment. Yeah, I can imagine that must be difficult. What about you mentioned also with favorite meals. So let's say it's the birthday of one of the riders doing a grand tour. How would you usually celebrate that even? Or if the team is celebrating it with a special dinner or a small tiny little cake. It's not there's no rest day coming up, but
no, still. So we know for now we have the whole menu set, of course, and of course all the birthdays are in there, not only for the riders but also from the staff, because when there's someone of the staff is birthday, then we also make sure that we have something really nice. And most of the time we celebrate that with the dessert, so that we prepare a dessert that he or she really likes and really enjoys. And then there are small candles, stuff like that, just to make sure that they really feel that they're special that day. Normally the rest of the meal doesn't change, except for when it's a cheat meal. Then we may go we may put a little bit of extra effort to make sure that they get what they want.
Nice. Have you ever encountered that a rider eat or drink too much in the evening, which could interrupt a good night of sleep?
So our riders most of the time tell us about their amount they have eaten and how it felt. So we tested everything before this race, of course. In previous races, we tested the amount. We changed with the amounts they eat before, after the race, and at dinner. And based on that, now we have like an ideal personal plan for that rider. So some get a little bit more for the recovery foods, some get a little bit more for dinner, depending on their on how they feel and how they want it. But normally here, the riders will never eat too much. So they are very much working on their food intake, so that they eat at least what they need. And most of the time, that's also enough. But they are also allowed to take more if they're still hungry.
If they're still hungry, yeah.
Yeah.
Coming into the last week of a grand tour, it must be difficult for the riders to keep eating and eating.
Yeah, so for example, for sure, the last week is really hard, because then our body is designed to, when we are suffering and when we are tired, then also our hunger system, I would say, is also getting lower. So it's really hard. Probably a lot of the recreational cyclists also experience that. If you had a really hard day of training, then afterwards you're not always feeling hungry. And then it's really important to keep eating. So in the last week of the Tour de France, it's exactly the same. The riders are not very hungry anymore, and they need to keep eating. So that's why we try to put a lot of flavor in the nutrition, try to present it in a really nice way, so that they keep their motivation to eat.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, it's never a problem, but at the end, we really need to make sure that they get what they need. And if they are having trouble, then they tell us, and we find other ways to make sure that they get what they need by, for example, introducing smoothies or something like that, which is easier to drink or to eat than a whole meal. But we try to work with that. Yeah.
Nice. There are different ways. That's good too. Good to know.
Yeah, it's a lot about numbers, a lot about objective measurements, but also the subjective feeling is really important. And we're all human, we're not robots. So if the rider is conquering any problems, then we try to look for a solution with a group as one team, to make sure that he gets everything he needs to perform at the highest level. Yeah.
No, that's a really good point. A really good point. Now we talked about food and carbohydrates, and we covered a lot. Let's talk hydration, because it's obviously a huge role in your ground. you don't want your riders to dehydrate or lacking on certain days. How many % of body weight does the pros lose due to dehydration over an epic mountain stage during the months of July?
So back in the days, there was like a rule that if you had a body weight loss of 2%, that your performance would go down. But we've noticed that is not in every case true. So it depends really on the rider, how much dehydration they can handle, and we also look at that. So of course, we did some sweat rate testing. We did some sodium testing to make sure that the sodium they're losing in sweat, that they're also having the intake right again. And based on their sweat rate, we make kind of a plan to make sure that they're not dehydrated or not too much for their personality or for their system. So it really depends on the rider if he needs to drink a lot or not.
What would the usual percentage be of body weight loss due to dehydration?
For some riders it will be 2% or 1%, and for others it can be near 6 or 7 even. So it really depends, but it's generally in that area. Yeah.
Do you then also make sure, we talked about the preloading before the stage and also hydrating before the stage, that the drinks, they have plenty of electrolytes in them before? I mean, of course, we know that could retain a little bit the water in the body.
Yeah.
The weight will go up a little bit, but they will sweat that out during the stage anyway, no?
Yeah, so most of the time we make sure that before the stage or when they get up, we see how their hydration state is, and we depending on if it's good or not, we might introduce something to make sure that it's optimized before they start the race. And then after the race, there's a general protocol of rehydration to make sure that they are hydrated again for the next stage or as good as possible. We do not really work with extra electrolytes because in our sports nutrition, there's currently in almost every product 200 milligram of sodium, which is for most of the riders enough to replenish their losses.
Their losses, yeah. So now I'm going to throw out there two words that are getting a lot of traction these days and the last 2 years: bicarbonate and ketone. We don't have to go into a deeper discussion here, but what's your take on those two words or those two topics?
So the topics you're now mentioning are supplements. And I think that we previously were talking about misconceptions in nutrition. And I think supplement use is one of the biggest misconceptions, because a lot of recreational riders, but also a lot of pro riders are thinking, I'm going to get supplements and then everything is solved and I don't need to think about nutrition. But nutrition is actually giving you the biggest advantage. So if your nutrition is not right, you will lose performance. So if you're a top rider and your nutrition is not right, then you will maybe just be an average rider. But if you're a top rider and your nutrition is good, then you might perform above your level. So it's going to make a real big difference. If you're taking supplements like bicarbonate and ketones, it's proven by science that they are useful. For sure, the bicarbonate has strong evidence that it's useful. So we use it to make sure that there's some ergogenic effect on the performance. We use ketones in terms of recovery. But riders are always free to choose what they really want and what they not want. And nutrition will give the biggest advantage. Yeah. So it's just a small extra, but it's not going to make the biggest difference.
It's better to get real food first, the right nutrition, and then you go into the supplements later. But it's the same, like you said before, same thing in everyday life. Don't go with vitamin supplements and when you go and buy your...
If the story is good to be true, then normally it is good to be true.
I like that. I like that ending. We're almost at the ending now. 2 last questions. What sort of nutrition advice would you give to everyday cyclists like myself and our podcast listeners and amateurs racing on the weekend? What is the key message that help boost our performance on the bike and in our everyday life?
So for sure, variation is a really important one. So try to put a lot of variation into your meals. Do not eat only pasta with tomato sauce and chicken, because variation is important for your micronutrients to make sure that your levels are high enough to boost your immune system. So that's a really important one. And then carbohydrates. If you are lacking carbohydrates, then it will make you slower. So you need to make sure that you get the right amount of carbs before, during, and after the race, after the training or the race, to get the best out of your performance.
Yeah, because you get the right carbo intake, get the energy on board, and then go out and smash it on the bike.
Yeah.
Because I think today there has been like this period where people are almost getting afraid of carbos, and we're tending to eat more protein, but we know that carbohydrates is that's the fuel for your ride.
Yeah. Yeah.
So don't be afraid of it.
No, you will burn the carbohydrates. Of course, you do not need to eat kilos of pasta or something, because of course then you will gain weight. But if you have the right amount of carbs for your performance, the highest as possible, then it will boost your performance. And I sometimes compare it with the fuel you use. If you put normal fuel in a Ferrari, then of course it will not perform, they will not perform as it should be.
Right.
But if you put like the super fuel for the Formula 1 cars in your car, then it will perform at best. And that's also with us. If we fuel with the wrong stuff, then we will not get the most out of our performance.
That was a good way to finish this episode. Maaike, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. I know that you are very busy at the start here of the 111th Tour de France. There is still one last question there from the beginning. I don't know if you've had any time to think about it, about the biggest nutrition myth you've ever heard, if you gave that a thought.
Yeah, so one of the biggest myths that I've heard is that you need to also ride with whole foods. So bananas, some bread with jam, stuff like that. And I do generally believe that it's better to use some bars and some chews and stuff like that, because then you know the right amount of carbs and you can really plan, which is not as easy if you make your own nutrition. So it's not always better to eat whole foods during training, and sometimes it is better to go to bars and gels that are more processed food.
Processed foods, yeah. Thank you so much for taking the time. It was very interesting. I learned a lot, and I hope also our listeners, they learned a lot here today. I'm pretty sure about that. I wish you and the team all the best of luck here at the Tour de France, and then I hope to see you sometime soon again.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here, and see you soon.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.